in Suite C. He's helped some very big organizations get through some very tough times. So really excited to have you all here. And as you all know, Suite C is designed to bring people together to share stories and help each other out. You know, this is a very unique group of executives and entrepreneurs and friends of each other. And like I keep telling people, this group is meant for executives who really want to be in the know, want access to quick information, and to be referred in by someone who would call you guys to get bailed out of jail. So if any of you, if I'm ever in a bind, I would call any one of you to bail me out of jail, especially Mark Sonnendecker, who is my husband and is legally obligated to bail me out of jail.
Oh,
see, notice how he's muted and hiding from that.
He's dark. He's gone dark.
Yeah. And let me just make sure. Yeah. So if anyone, so Veronica, did you ever run into that issue with Remo when someone in presentation mode wasn't able to share their slideshow?
No, we never ran into it.
Yeah, it keeps happening, Veronica, in this situation.
Oh, really?
We're able to share it and present it if we have the presentation, but the presenter is unable. It is weird.
How you doing, Nadine?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
You know, it's
Good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So we've got a few more people texting me that are joining us, but wanted to welcome each of you. I think I'm just going to go around and introduce you guys while we wait. Nadine Petrowski, thank you for being here. Nadine Petrowski, audit partner, has been through a lot of crises in her days, helping out companies. And Andy is a great friend to her and to us, so thank you for being here. Andy is our presenter. Tiffany Vincent is muted, and she is the one who's helping us figure out all these technology life hacks for us. And I think for right now we're going to be okay, Andy. The challenge is I really wanted to do the poll questions and this and that, and we kind of lose that when we're not in presentation mode. But I think Tiffany has a workaround in that she will record what you start sharing once that happens, right, Tiff? All right, I'm going to take that as a yes.
yes.
I think she said she needed to step out for a quick call.
Okay, all right.
That's
Well,
okay.
while we're waiting, why don't we tell us what's the best thing that happened to you guys today?
I have one.
Okay, what?
We, a very small dog, found her way into our garage on Saturday. And we put out flyers next door and went to the animal shelter to no avail. But today found her owner and she's reunited with her family. They've had her for 10 years.
That's a great thing to happen.
That was a great story.
So happy to see her. She was just so excited to see all of them. And they have kids who are 5 and 1, and they were just ecstatic to get their dog back. So it was really sweet. It was really nice. My son is sad because he was getting a little attached to her, but I'm like, she's not our dog. Somebody's desperately looking for her because she had all the cuteness of your dog, B.
Oh, that's cute. That's a great thing. Hey, Jenna, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jenna.
Hi, we're just starting off by telling each other what the best thing that happened to us today was. Mine is this moment right now, as soon as we get the technology working.
Mine too.
Man, technology, right? How about what's the best thing that happened to you today, Andy, before we got this figured out?
Great question. We had a great resolution on a crisis this morning that resolved itself the way we wanted it to, and the client had to do a big trust leap with me on this crisis, but he did it and it worked out, and he was very happy. It ended about noon today, so
Yeah,
good resolution for sure.
that's a win.
That's a win.
That's awesome. That is a great win. How about you, Veronica?
I woke up in my own bed this morning.
Whoa, is that unusual, Veronica?
No, I've been traveling for the last week. And no, that's not how it sounded. I've been traveling in hotels and things, and it's like, I just want to be home. And I, wake up to, my kitties and running all over me in the morning and things like that. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, good. How about Regina? You're on mute and hidden, so I'm going to skip over to Jenna.
The best thing that happened to me today. It's a hard one. I went to my physical therapist this morning because I've been having some hip pain and it's not serious. So that's
Yay!
good news. Yeah.
That's really good news.
Just got
Very good
some
news.
at-home PT stuff to work on, but he's like, I'm not concerned. So this is good news.
That's awesome.
That is.
That is great. All right. Well, I think so. Andy, do you want to? We didn't figure out how to. Tiffany's not back, so why don't we
I'm
just?
here.
Oh, you are.
Yeah, I've been here.
Oh, hi, Tiff. We were just trying to figure out like the. So you think so? If Andy starts presenting from here, you have a way of recording this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, well, let's start again then. Welcome everybody by people who have no other interest other than helping you succeed in your executive life. So that is why we're here. Thank you, Andy Boian, for being here. Thank you, Tiffany. Can we start? That was a really good speech. Tell me you recorded that, Tiffany.
I did.
That was great. That was really good of me.
Yeah, you're killing it.
Well, killing it. Well, welcome all, Andy. I will let Andy start, and I wanted to make sure that you guys know there's a chat function down at the bottom where you can ask questions to the general public. In presentation mode, it's really cool because you can ask anonymously, but that's not working at the moment. There are some polls that I will be putting out there, so you guys can answer them if you'd like. Andy will be available for Q&A, and there are a few of you that I'm going to pick on because I know that you've all faced crises or have had clients face crises that are super relevant. So we'll do that. We'll do some Q&A, and then at the very end, we'll do a couple of breakout tables to divide us up a little bit and talk about what we heard. Then we'll all gather back together. Thank Andy, and this will all be uploaded onto the Sweet C platform. So there was a lot of people that wanted to be here today that couldn't make it. So I promised them there would be a recording of some sort for them to access.
Very good. Okay. Thank you, B. Should I go to share then?
Yeah, I would just go to share, and then because that's what we figured out how to make it work. And if anyone has any issues, let me know.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to B and thank you to Nadine. Nadine has been a friend and former client of ours and a really dear friend for many years. So thank you very much, Nadine, for the introduction to Sweet C, and B, thanks for allowing me to be here today. And thanks to all of you for coming. I'm grateful to you for that. Just by way of background, my name is Andy Boian. I own and run a company called Dovetail Solutions. We're a full service communications, messaging, branding, public affairs, political strategy, and crisis and issues management firm. So we are based in Denver, and we have offices on both coasts as well. And we do largely everything related to branding, communications, marketing, and issues in crisis management, along with political strategy. So the example I have for you today has a little bit of all of that mixed into it, but it's basically a front seat view of what happened during the 2016 presidential race between then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and former President Donald Trump, and particularly around what happened with the server issue, which
hey, Andy, sorry, real quick, your screen's black. Is anyone else seeing that? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, same here. I was just typing that. It says that the user is having some connection issues.
Andy,
am I the user?
Yes, but it's okay. We're ready. Tiffany has your presentation up and running. If you just want to raise your hand when you want us to go forward, we can do it that way.
Okay, so it's working now. So I'm going to just click it and go forward. Can you see that screen now?
No, I don't know why.
No.
And it does say user is having connection issues, video interruption.
All right, let me.
How strange! I'm not having issues.
Let me just try real quick and see if this resolves it. Okay.
Oh, look it's transcribing.
Are we good to keep going?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So just by way of background quickly, so that's what Dovetail Solutions is about. We're a 19-year-old firm. I've been in the business for 35 years, and my background by way of communications started with work in politics and on political campaigns, and then I went to work in the Clinton White House when the president first took office in 1993, and I served until the autumn of '94. So any of you know anything about Bill Clinton, you know that the very definition of crisis is clearly defined by that presidency and by that man specifically. And I would say this to him if he was here with me today, which is that he was kind of like Pigpen in Peanuts, when you know how you'd watch Pigpen and every time you'd see him run around, he'd always have swirling dirt around him all the time. That's sort of how Bill Clinton was, but the swirling was crises. Every single thing that President Clinton did, it felt like was a crisis or crisis related, and it always had to do with urgency, and it had to do with getting it done quickly and getting it done efficiently. And so I learned really firsthand what it was like to be. First of all, he was the youngest president in American history to take office, and secondly, what it was like to basically have on-the-job training at 19 and 20 years old while attending college to work in the West Wing. So it was an interesting time, and we can talk more about that later. First, when we talk about crisis communications and we talk about issues management, we really want to talk about what defines a crisis. What actually is a crisis? A lot of people say, this is a crisis. We're in crisis mode. And in reality, are you really? And the definition of a crisis is really defined by something that is emergent, that has to take place or have action taken on it right away. And third, has instant repercussion. So whatever you do will have some kind of reverb out in public. So let's say, for example, that we have a crisis in our company of some kind. We need to talk about, if we've agreed that it's a crisis and we need to act on it, we need to talk about the following 5 items. The first is, what steps need to be taken to determine the severity of the situation? So how serious is the crisis? Are we talking about a publicly traded company that's about to get their stock hit because of a bad product or bad news coming out? Or is it something related to something that happened on premise of some kind and needs to be fixed? Or is it innuendo and just suggestion and may not be a crisis? But let's talk about the severity of what it is. Second, how soon does anyone need to act to avert any public issues? Meaning, how fast is the public going to find out about this crisis? And that also is dependent upon the severity of the crisis and also who you are, who your company is, who you represent. All of that is going to be part and parcel for wanting to hire a crisis expert, or if you have one or you are one, making sure that you're staying out of the public eye if it is in fact something that needs to be. Third is who and what determines the news value. So if it is a crisis of substantial immersion, you're going to want to determine right away, is this something that's press-worthy? Is the press going to pick up on this? So for example, we represent the Denver Police Department. There are 4 firms that each take a quarter a year to represent DPD. And right now is our quarter. So every time there's a police shooting, either actively involving an officer or an officer has shot somebody, we determine instantly what is and what is not of news value right away. So what's the situation? We talk about what steps we need to take and how soon do we need to be out in front of the public to avert any issues. Fourth, are there steps which have been preempted to make sure we're not caught flat-footed? This is a big one. This has to do with writing a crisis communications plan and having it in place prior to a crisis happening. All the time when crises happen and I ask the person or the company entity, do you have a crisis comms plan? 95% of the time they say no. We didn't do that because we didn't either believe we had a crisis or we weren't worried about averting anything because nothing's ever happened here. And the fifth is it's not that big of a deal attitude is 100% always wrong. It's always wrong. Because even if you feel that it's not a big deal to you or it's not a big deal to your customers, it is a big deal to someone. And you need to make sure, and that goes back to number one, how severe that big deal is, right? So those 5 items are really what define a crisis. Common misperceptions about a crisis itself is it's not that big a deal. We've talked about that. The press won't really care, and no one really will. We can contain it internally. Let's not overblow this and keep quiet about it, and we can handle this ourselves. Those are the 5 most common misperceptions about a crisis, particularly at the corporate level. And it always has to do with some level of, as I said before, severity about the crisis itself. So when you determine what is and what is not a crisis, you want to think about who is the audience that will care most about this and what will their reaction be, right? And it's not just about the media. It's also about, can we contain it internally? Most likely you can't without a professional helping you. And if you can't, what do you do when actually the press gets word of it or the public gets word of it? That's a very big issue with regard to crises. So we're going to talk about a real world example of a crisis that took place a few years ago that everybody knew about. And the reason I chose this crisis is a couple of reasons. One, everybody knows about this crisis. So everybody understood what was going on. Everybody watched the news or heard about it, had an opinion about it, heard a talking head on television talk about it, read it in the paper, and we were on one side of it. And it had to do with the servers and the emails around Secretary Hillary Clinton when she was running for president of the United States in 2016. We were hired by the company that maintained the server called Platte River Networks. And it's a company that's based here in Denver. And they were hired a year or so before we were by the Clintons to maintain their servers on their personal property in New York. So it's an interesting example of how big a crisis can get, because the other part of this presentation is about, this is a clear example of how big something can get, how quickly it can get out of control, and how fast you need a response to it. So we were hired by, under the president's and the secretary's direction, we were hired by Platte River Networks to maintain communication with both the press and the public about what is real and what was not real. At the same time we were beginning the process, Fox News had already dispatched their national group, not their local Fox News affiliate, but the Fox News familiar with Sean Hannity and those others, broadcasting literally outside the front door of our client's office in Denver. So they sent reporters out to do active reporting from the company right outside their front door. The press and the public do care, obviously. And if you're questioning that, error always on the side of caution. So when we told the client right away, okay, the first thing you need to deal with is the fact that you're inside the building right now, and right outside the building is Fox News. And the idea is you can contain if caught early, a professional firm is aiding and directly involved. That had to do specifically with Platte River Networks waiting until the last moment to hire us. Why? Because they didn't believe it was a big deal. They didn't see the severity of it. They didn't believe it was necessary. And fourth, they severely underestimated the interest of the public. So much so that on day 4 of our crisis work with them, the candidate's son, Donald Trump Jr., showed up at the front door of our client's office also, which I'll show you, to make a commercial for his father. So it was a very interesting crisis. We'll talk more about it. Obviously, we got involved with federal authorities. There were death threats made, so it was a very serious crisis. Obviously, the idea in a crisis like this and any crisis is to always be prepared. And anytime you are unprepared in terms of a crisis, 9 times out of 10, bad things happen. And the reason that is largely around being not only unprepared, but unaware of all the things that can happen and are necessary to be aware of during a crisis. So never underestimate a crisis. So when a crisis hits, are you prepared? And this is what we show clients all the time about how to make sure that they're prepared. And it starts with the top right, which is obviously you want to do all you can to prevent any type of crisis or large issue that would require a firm like ours or somebody like me to come in and help. You want to try to prevent that as much as possible by writing a crisis comms plan, making sure you are ready to go if anything should happen, and then obviously preparing your staff and your team for how to deal with it when it hits. So next is the mitigation of the crisis. So you've prevented all you can, the crisis still happens. What you want to do is mitigate everything you can to make sure that the crisis, while happening, is as contained as possible. Third is preparedness. So you're now in the crisis. How prepared are you? How prepared are you to mitigate the circumstance, to make sure that whatever has happened has been not only addressed, but is being coordinated at the same time you're then next responding? Response to a crisis is as critical as acknowledging the crisis in the first place. The failure to respond adequately to a crisis leads to what you see on the news every night, what makes the national news every night, which is people that are totally unprepared or companies or entities that are totally unprepared for what's happening. The response has to be measured, and it has to be something that you've all agreed to and thought of and are out with one single voice. And then the last piece is obviously the recovery post-crisis. So I've prepared you for the server issue. Let's get into it a little bit. So as I said, PRN in this is referring to Platte River Networks, which is the client, that was the company that hosted the server. The issue with underestimating is that it can never be recalled, right? So if you underestimate the crisis itself, you can never call it back. And we created a chart on the bottom. If you see vertically, it looks at the activity of the crisis itself, and the horizontal line shows the time spent on the crisis. Nadine, I'm sure you appreciate this because this looks very CPA audit like to me. So these charts look very difficult to understand to me, but we created this in terms of showing that the firm itself, Platte River Networks, underestimated the severity of the crisis significantly. We started behind and had to play catch up fast. We lost ground from the outset. That was the thing they said to me on day one. We have started from behind. And remember, I said Fox News is outside and they're preparing for what is going to end up being a very significant part of the presidential campaign. The question is, how do we prepare? And they really wanted to know quickly, what do we do next? How do we change what has already happened? We're going to go through a full timeline and what our client faced from this graph here. So if you see on the bottom right, the kind of explosion down there on the bottom left is the actual crisis when it happened. That is the news that somehow Secretary Clinton put state-sponsored secret emails on her personal email and in her personal server, which was housed in the basement of her home in Chappaqua, New York. So that's the crisis. That's when it hit. And all of a sudden, she's being accused of putting State Department secret information on a private server that belonged to her and her husband. So the emergency response you can see is the red. So all of a sudden, it went straight up. So that not only was Fox News outside, but every other news outlet really around the world was focused on this new detail regarding this presidential race because she was the Democratic nominee. And there was a Republican nominee as well. So we were set for the general. What you see next is the yellow in there. That is crisis management and what crisis communications can help with. And that's where we got involved. And what happens is that green line there is a successful recovery. If you see the green is the business recovery of the firm. So while the emergency response was happening, they hired us, which we're the yellow there, and then the green was mitigating it so much that we recovered the business, the company survived, we've lived to tell the story, and Platte River Networks continues to be a thriving company that obviously provides server access and server warehousing for companies all over the world.
Andy, can I ask a quick question? This made me think of
Please.
something. What
Please.
how would you have dealt with, I mean, maybe this is for later, but like the whole voting thing, right? I'm not stating an opinion about that whole thing, but the servers, the voting servers, the company that ended up suing because they were due to voting errors. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Do you mean during
Like
the 2020
Dominion.
election?
Yes.
Dominion Voting Services? Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a different entity, a whole different situation, but that was actually not about servers so much as it was about voting machines. So Dominion is a company that owns voting machines, and in that scenario, there were investigations that took place and never found that Dominion had anything wrong with their voting machines. So as you can see now, what's happening in federal court is that people that accuse Dominion, and you've got very famous names like Rudy Giuliani and others that accuse Dominion of manipulating their voting systems, actually in the voting machines actually was not the case, and most have recanted at this point. So
yeah, I guess I'm thinking of, like, if I'm the CEO or CFO of Dominion, like that is a huge PR nightmare in terms of like your core business. Like you know what I mean? So I guess I was just wondering your thoughts on how they handled that whole thing.
Yeah, I would tell you that I think they handled it poorly because they let it go on too long. The great thing about a crisis, B, and everybody, is that if you're in the right, you really need to lean into that. If you've done nothing wrong and you know that, and you're being accused of something that you are clearly not guilty of, it dramatically reduces the amount of anxiety and stress that you have because you know you've done nothing wrong. If you have truth and if you have honor on your side, crises tend to be much more easily dealt with in that case. And so with Dominion, they did nothing wrong, and it was proven. They handed over all their voting machines, and nothing was seen as abnormal at all. So in this case, with Platte River Networks, they submitted an RFP response. They won the work, and they were hired to house the servers for the Clintons. And to the right, that's the name of the server they use. It's called Fortinet, and it basically was a server that looked just like that. And there were 2 or 3 of them. And what you see in front of you, Equinix, is what's called a server farm. So inside all those gates on both sides of that, down that hallway, are servers that are protected by. Important to remember in this situation is you are hired, in Platte River's case, you're hired as server specialists. You're IT professionals. You are not communications, crisis, PR professionals. So you really need to think about hiring professionals to handle crises and specialists when it's necessary. When you have a legal proceeding, most people do not represent themselves in legal proceedings in court. They usually hire a professional, a licensed attorney, to go in and represent them. And although we are not licensed by any means, we are all, at least at our firm, we are all specialists in crisis that can handle this and also understand whom else to bring in when we need to. So in this case, they decided they needed us. They needed it right now. They hired us, and they hired a law firm at the same time. One of the first questions we asked was, do you have legal representation? They said, no. We said, we're not lawyers. We don't provide legal advice. You want to keep separated the PR and the legal from each other, largely because lawyers are licensed to practice. We are not. We're certified, but we are not licensed. And it's really important that you have both a legal team and a PR team on your crisis. And then critical questions to know ahead of time, meaning when we come in right away, we need to ascertain right away, what have you done? What have you said? What has anybody said? What have you committed to? What are you willing to commit to? And at the end of the day, what does it look like for you? What does it look like right now, given the fact that you're the specialists and you're the folks that know the server? Tell us everything you know about Hillary Clinton's server, where it is, and what's housed on it. they were able to do that straight away. Enter the news, right? So the story breaks and Platte River Networks is in the news. On the left is your local ABC station, Mitch Jelniker there, who most of you know, who's now since retired. But at the time, he was leading this story locally. Channel 7 was all over it. In the middle is the national Fox network, Greta Van Susteren, who was a well-respected journalist and was part of the Fox News team back then. And she was on the story every day. So that split screen there is my client's office building, where the finger's pointed right there. And then below that is obviously the candidate. And so they were talking regularly about this all the time. To the right is CBS News National. So we knew right away that this was going to be a national story. From the local to the left to the national on the right. This was when the story broke. And this is how it broke. It broke basically with, oh my gosh, we're a Denver-based server company. We're representing a very high-profile person, and we're in national news. That sent them into a panic. Media frenzy, right? So we have national reporters showing up every day, both downtown Denver and at my client's office, which is right there on the right. If you can, and you see the Fox News logo on the bottom left, you can tell right away that this was going to be a big story, that they were going to send reporters nationally to Denver, to my client's office building, which, by the way, look at that office building for a second. I mean, that's such a nondescript building. You don't think anything of it, but that was the center of national attention for weeks. And our job was to minimize it as much as possible. So reporters showed up, obviously, and that's the reporter there on the left, where you have usually a camera person that holds up a camera and does live shots for the reporter. But also the advent of digital media has dramatically changed how media works these days. The ability to send something out on X, formerly Twitter, or on Facebook, or on Instagram, or on TikTok right away has dramatically changed the media landscape for crises. And so during this, when this was all happening in 2015, digital media was obviously just fervent, and there was news 24/7. The 24-hour/7 news cycle was not something that happened when I joined the White House. When I joined the White House in 1993, we didn't have 24/7 news. And by the time I left the White House, we did. And so CNN was 24/7. And it was a very important part of how we managed this crisis. So the PR part of this was managing the media and managing what was true and what was said to be true and what clearly was not true. And it was very important to keep those two distinguished. What was hyperbole and what was actual fact. Here's an example of fake news. So Clinton stored top secret emails in her bathroom, employees reveal. Tech firm that set up Hillary's email server loves going out for shots. The person on the right is he's an actual person. He was the director of sales for Platte River Networks, who at the time was receiving death threats saying that he was colluding with Hillary Clinton to get her elected, and that these emails he was trying to shove aside and ignore the facts. And so all three of these examples are what's called fake news, which means
I remember distinctly in journalism class in 1998 or something, that you couldn't put stuff out there if it hasn't been vetted. Obviously, the internet has changed all that, but how do people get away with putting stuff that obviously isn't true?
Well, that's the beauty of the free press and that's why I have a job. I'm getting my kids through college based on the fact that we have free press, and that the press basically can go in and make up stories. And as they said on the far left there, employees reveal. So they're even saying in the headline, they have a source that has said, yeah, they're in our bathroom. Never true. We didn't ever have a server in our bathroom. Never happened. And so what happens in these scenarios is that you have to learn and how to trust specialists and experts in the area of crisis on what to pay attention to and what not to. So the middle one, the tech firm that set up Hillary's email server loves going out for shots, made no sense to us. That makes no sense. But yet it's titled Politics. That was on Huffington Post, and it made no sense the entire time that we're a bunch of people that drink a lot and don't care about our work, and it really made no sense and was absolutely 100% untrue. Okay, so that's fake news. Managing social media. There's your picture of Donald Trump Jr. standing outside my client's office building, shooting a commercial for his father, who was running for president in 2016 and ultimately succeeded. In that regard, managing social media is a critical part. If you see there, Donald Trump Jr. put up a post on Instagram that says, in Colorado today, stop by Platte River Networks company that deleted Clinton emails. I couldn't find any. 30,000 gone, ? So social media has an incredibly important impact in news. In no time ever did we delete 30,000 emails. Not true, never happened, and it was proven so. But if you look on what Mr. Oliveris wrote to us on September 7th of 2015, he wrote, "You'll be put in jail. Ask for immunity and come clean, or she will kill you." So obviously, threats like that are taken seriously. Hand those over to federal authorities, which we did. That continued. I wonder if good old friend at David Deek of Platte River Networks is willing to go up the river for Hillary Clinton. How about it, Davey? 3 hots and a cot.
Kaden,
going to jail for doing what you're doing.
Get your
We
paper.
never
The
did anything
puppy's
wrong.
got it.
Again, fake news, personal information, hate posts, all those things are part of how you manage a crisis. And in a high stakes, high intensity, very high profile event like the presidential race of 2016, it was very clear that the candidate on the Republican side was willing and able at every turn to not only post social media like his son did here, but also make hay of a story in which there was no factual basis of deleting 30,000 emails. Regardless of people's politics in this, we had to stick to the facts. Regardless of how people feel about whatever candidate, you always have to stick to the facts. And in a crisis, facts always win. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So we looked at the website for Platte River Networks, and we watched exactly when the traffic increased, when it decreased, and what you're going to see in a crisis is, and one thing to manage all the time when we're speaking on digital media is how often are people pinging your website? What are they looking at? So we saw an increased traffic right when the crisis hit in July of 2015, right? So we tamped down security on the website itself. People couldn't hack into our website. We tightened up security there. We really made sure that people's social media, particularly the executives at Platte River Networks, were secured and taken down. All personal information was removed. So we went in and scrubbed personal information from all that was happening during the time to make sure that all personal information was removed from the website, and all personal information was removed from everything that the public had access to, so that there was no way at any time that the public would have access to the CEO of Platte River Networks, where he lived or his family, etc. And then also partner information, meaning there were other executives at the firm beyond the gentleman I showed you earlier, the head of sales and the president and owner of Platte River Networks, that we need to pay attention to. Because if you look at the website traffic significantly increased from July to about September in 15. It went down again and stayed dormant. That was us working the crisis from October 15 all the way through the election. You see it spike again just before the election in October of 2016. You see it spike for most of the month, and then literally it died down right after the election and quieted down again. So by January of 2017, when Donald Trump was inaugurated President of the United States, the website for Platte River Networks went quiet again. And that was the goal. The goal was to have this company survive this crisis. And it is their belief that without the work that we did, they wouldn't have survived. And it's critically important that you pay attention to all these metrics. Look at these Google reviews. So while we're looking at the website, we're seeing things like complicit to treason. They're enemies of the USA. What a bunch of scumbags. These guys are treasonous, should be thrown out of the country. Deleting federal records is a crime, punishable by public hanging. I hope you go out of business. You're a new level of un-American. I mean, all these things were daily hits that Platte River Networks were taking for doing nothing wrong. Again, this is the server company. When you put it in the context of the crisis, this was the server company. This was not representing the Secretary of State. This is the server company, and they're getting threats like this. All because people said there were servers in bathrooms, and she's deleting emails, and she's scrubbing servers, all of which were untrue. But yet, if you let these Google reviews take over, this is what becomes of your company. And without proper training and without the ability to survive this, you're going to get a lot of one-star reviews on Google, and you're going to go out of business. And it was very important to manage all of these and make sure that both the client and the public know the truth. So on our website, as we were looking at inquiries into what was a call to action on the website to hire Platte River Networks to manage your server, we were getting comments and questions like these. You're a bunch of liars, cheat sneaks. Your company and your employees make me sick to my stomach. I hope you lose it all. You're wicked people for hiding the server for so long. Why I wasn't in a bathroom at one point. So all these things are really important to manage. You get the point. But that continued on as we were managing the crisis. So one of the things that happens in high-profile crises is, and particularly in a world that we live in now, where it has become more divisive and more aggressive, particularly when it comes to belief systems for people, regardless of people's beliefs, there are these kinds of things that come up. So the phone would ring to staff, and there would be death threats. There'd be social media posts that would say, "We know where your children go to school. We understand where your wife works, or we know where your husband shops," etc. And that came out on Twitter. It was given on the website and in emails as well. So that was a big deal. And managing death threats, we had to put protection. We had to put bodies on each one of the executives at Platte River Networks for 7 months. And unfortunately, during this time, on this crisis, we had to put a body on my wife as well. People found out who was managing. I was obviously front-facing all the time. They found out where I was, what my family was doing. And so it is a very serious issue for sure. Okay. A little bit more about managing security. So when you have a physical presence, like an office building, or you have a physical presence in an office, or you have people that walk to their cars, et cetera, you want to make sure that everything is managed securely. The building is managed infrastructure. They can't break into your website. They can't get into your emails, et cetera. And you also make sure that your staff is safe. Okay, so what happened during this is an investigation by the federal government. So as soon as this started happening, the process was interesting because it was by both sides of the aisle involving questions about the security and detail of the State Department's emails. And so you've got a congressman there who was asking questions about in the investigation what exactly happened. And then obviously then enter the FBI and James Comey when he had 100 plus emails to look at before obviously the election, and what happened as a result of all those investigations was a part of how to manage the crisis as well. The whole time you are working through a crisis, you want to think about how your employees are feeling and what the morale is of your employees, particularly with regard to how to keep them aware, how to keep them understanding, and also how to keep them safe. So adequate training. We do a lot of crisis comms training, how to manage a crisis and what to do if you're an employee of a company that's involved in a crisis. We do have and write scripted responses. So if, for example, you are asked by the media a question about the crisis itself, what are you to say? What happens if you are walking to your car and you get approached by a reporter? Communication, you want to make sure internal communication remains constant and fervent, and that if anybody has any questions, they have the ability to ask those questions in a safe environment. And obviously, as we discussed, security, but the employee morale is an important part of any crisis, and managing it well and making sure you're paying attention. You want to think about cost during a crisis as well. And these are things that are not built into a budget necessarily when you do an annual budget for a crisis. You think about legal fees. Legal fees can get expensive fast. PR firm fees. You basically have to be able and willing to build this into a budget quickly when it's sometimes not anticipated. Everybody should have E&O, errors and omissions insurance. If you're providing a professional service, you should have insurance that protects you from being sued for any errors or omissions that are done during your tenure at the job. Google rankings, obviously, you want to check that out as well. Oftentimes, what happens when a high-profile crisis happens is your Google ratings tend to drop a little bit, and you want to prop those back up by buying Google ads, buying Google Words, backing up your website SEO, making sure that your website is still maintained and built, and you want to make sure that you're still generating leads, you're retaining your customers, and your business development pipeline doesn't dry up. So you're kind of dual purposing this whole thing. So during the entire time, Platte River Networks was working on all of those things under our direction to make sure that they still had companies that were coming to them asking for business, even though they were, showcased on CBS Evening News or NBC Nightly News on a regular basis for a matter of months. The common question people ask all the time is, will this ever stop? Will this come to an end? Whether it's a crisis that is mitigated within 24 hours or a crisis that lasts 10 months, like this one did, it has to be reassured that this will end. This is not the way this will continue, and this is only temporary. And the best way to do that is to get out and get out in front as quickly as possible. So how to prepare for a crisis, how to make sure that things like this don't happen when you're not prepared. Protection of your brand and reputation is number one. You want to think about anytime you're involved in a crisis, how to protect your brand, how your reputation must stay intact. If you are known as, if everybody followed those Google reviews and if everybody listened and read and commented on what was said during this whole thing for Platte River, they wouldn't have survived. Right? So it's very clear that you have to have the brand reputation up front and fast forward on any kind of brand preparation now to make sure that it's protected in a time of need. Have to have a crisis communication plan prior to having to use it. So that's really important. And I'm not suggesting that the crisis communications plan needs to be complicated. It really doesn't. It doesn't need to be so in the weeds that you write a plan that has every scenario listed out in it. That's not what we're asking. What we're suggesting is that you put a plan together that says, you know what, if something happens and we need help protecting our brand or reputation, that we have a basic plan put in place to protect it. That is absolutely critical. And a crisis comms plan, we've written crisis comms plans that are 7 pages long, and written plans that are 55, 60, 70 pages long that have scenarios built within them to manage them differently. I'm not suggesting that it needs to be that detailed, but you do need to have something in place. Ongoing plan maintenance to adapt to change. This is important. Your company and your lifestyles, your personnel, your product, your industry, the world always is constantly changing, and you have to adapt to that change all the time. You have to have the plan be updated on a regular basis. I would suggest you update the plan once every 12 to 18 months to make sure that it's relevant to markets you're in, new products you're providing, new services you're providing, new people you brought on board, and an ever-changing economy. So in the case of the economy now, right, we're watching the economy constantly shift and constantly be looking at new things happening, companies thriving, some companies struggling, some opportunities for a good rental rate for a downtown office property right now, right? In downtown Denver might not have been the case 18, 24 months ago. So there are things that are constantly changing. You want to make sure and maintain that plan. Also, very critical when you're writing a plan and you're talking about ongoing maintenance, pre-select a person to speak on behalf of the firm and train him or her ongoing. Some companies prefer that we speak on their behalf. That is most often the case. If there is a crisis, they prefer to not have their CEO on television. And I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, that's the smart move, particularly for companies that are in a highly volatile industry and companies that have a lot to lose. If by some chance, with all due respect, and I'm a CEO, so I can say this, their CEO says something he or she shouldn't have said. And that happens a lot in interviews with the media. That is not the fault of the media. They're doing their job. But what happens is,
sorry, Andy, that's a really
ahead,
good thing to point out. In my experience with CEOs and CFOs, it's usually, we talk a lot about how the company suffers if it's not handled right or if something isn't done right. It always comes down on the CEO, CFO, COO, owner.
always.
And personally on their reputation going forward. So this kind of thing can really affect a person's career. Just as bad as picking the wrong audit partner, right, Nadine? Anyway, sorry to interrupt, Andy, but I wanted to point that out because I these kinds of decisions I've seen make or break a person's reputation through no fault of their own. Sometimes
that's not only exactly on point, B, but it's a fact. I mean, crises not only can, we talked earlier about publicly traded companies, and companies oftentimes, publicly traded companies of which we represent some, they worry about their stock price. And they worry about a crisis tanking their stock price. I mean, that's the least of their concerns, right? In a publicly traded company, and Nadine, you can speak directly to this, but when you're talking about a crisis that hits a company, even if it's a bad earnings report, that's considered sometimes a crisis. And so we've been brought into publicly traded companies when they have bad earnings, and they say in 48 hours we're releasing awful earnings, and we need to have a plan in place on how to mitigate the media and shareholders who are going to come rip our faces off. And so we need to figure out right now what to do. And so it's really important in this process, B, to your point, that if you put your CEO or you put your head of company out there, he or she has to be trained on an ongoing basis, not just once, but they have to be ready for the hard, really tough questions. So 9 times out of 10, companies choose guys like me, men and women like me, to go out on their behalf and answer really tough questions. Here's a secret about the media too. If you have a crisis and you are in front of a microphone and you're being asked a question, this is something I told the Denver police chief literally this morning. When you are asked a question, it is not about the question you're being asked. It is about the comments made thereafter. So if you're asked a particular question right away, did your officer or did your officer not shoot this person? And then you say, it's an ongoing investigation. We don't have an answer for you yet. We're still looking at it. The follow-up question is the one they care most about, which is something like, well, when are we going to know? Or will you identify the officer? Or can you tell us when my airplane's going to take off? We're going to talk about Southwest in a minute. Or can you tell me why you have all your aircraft parked at the gate and none of them are leaving and it's blue sky outside? Right? So you want to make sure that you have the person in front of the camera or in front of the people writing notes all the time trained consistently on how to answer the tough questions. So that's how you prepare for a crisis. The contents of the plan are below. Very quick, and I know you can all read, so I'll speed through them quickly. The potential of crises affecting said company, that obviously needs to be in the plan. What happens if my hotel catches on fire? That happened 2 weeks ago to a client. His hotel caught on fire. They had to evacuate the hotel, and it made national news. It was a big fire. Some of you probably saw it. It was in Los Angeles, and his hotel caught on fire. How does that affect your company? Who exactly is on the communications team? Who are the critical people that need to be a part of the decision-making process when you are deciding on who's going to speak? Is it the CEO? Is it all your C-level executives? Is it the head of public policy? Is it the head of communications? Is it your marketing people? Right? Your crisis communications policy. Who speaks and when? Does everybody get to speak? Is it one person? What are we going to say? Are we going to put anything out on social media? What does our LinkedIn look like? Who's monitoring the website traffic right now? Who's reading our comments on our call to action on our website? Call here for service. So they start calling and they're saying, in Platte River's case, they're issuing death threats and they're scaring the employees. We do what's called the situational assessment in each crisis communications plan. So we determine just how severe the crisis will affect your said company. That's really important. So if you have a fire in your hotel, how is that going to affect your brand? What does that mean? Spokesperson responsibilities. Very quickly, obviously, who's going to speak and when? We've talked about that. Crisis communications checklist. We create a checklist all the time that says, of these 24 things, make sure that the first 12 are done within the first hour. Make sure that these are done within the first day, and make sure you've made this clear within the first week. Developing key messages. I'm going to ask this question to each of you, and those that want to respond, I'd love to hear your answer. I'm also a college professor, so I know all the time when my students aren't paying attention. How long is the attention span of an American adult? Take a guess.
7 minutes.
I was going to say 10 minutes. Probably
7
like
minutes,
2.
10 minutes. Mark, you got to answer. Tell me.
Oh, Mark,
What is the
he's on a call. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned federal agencies. Mark is one, and he's on a call with about a crisis right now.
He's not going to answer.
I think it's
Okay.
less. I think it's less. I think it's like 3
3 what?
minutes.
Anybody else want to guess?
I agree. I think it's 3 minutes.
The attention span of a grown adult American is 7 seconds.
Oh my God.
7 seconds. 7
Yeah,
seconds. So here's why that's relevant. Here's why that's relevant, everybody. If you think about, that's why the news gives you the quick hits right away at the top of the hour, because they know you're going to pay attention on an average for 7 seconds. If I don't catch your attention in 7 seconds, I've lost you.
Oh, that's so true. Jack guessed 8 seconds. Jack, how did you know that? Jack has a longer than average attention span at 8 seconds for a CFO.
Well, Jack's coming in and out of the table. I noticed he's jumping.
Yeah,
in,
he's
just went off.
He's driving right now.
Oh, Jack's back in the table. So Jack said 8 seconds.
8 seconds, yeah.
He said 8.
So Jack is dead on right. It's 7 seconds, everybody. So when you're looking at the next car commercial, they're trying to sell you an Audi. And I'm going to tell you Audi because we represent Audi. So I'm going to say in the 7 seconds I'm trying to get you to buy an Audi, I'm driving the car at 100 plus miles per hour. That's the rule that we have for Audi advertising. In the first 7 seconds of an Audi commercial, the car has to be at 100 mile an hour plus. And if it's not, we're not going to catch your attention, because nobody drives 100 miles an hour except my son sometimes, which I'll have a separate about that. But if we don't catch your attention in 7 seconds, we're gone. So the reason that the if it bleeds, it leads. Have you ever heard that in press? Right.
Mm-hmm.
The stories where people have been shot, stabbed, wounded, those lead the news because that's what draws your attention. Right. They don't start the news with the weather, even though the weather is the most interesting and oftentimes the most sought after part of the news program for most Americans. Their attention span 7 seconds. So we need to get you the information now, fast, quickly. And if we don't, then you're going to start to make assumptions on your own. So developing key messages is really important to deliver the message fast, quickly, efficiently, and make sure it's clear. One thing Platte River Networks did not do well before they hired us was provide any defense to a server being in the bathroom. Next is employee communications. You want to make sure, as I said before, make sure to communicate with all your employees, let them know what's happening. The worst thing that can happen is that your employees find out bad news about their company on the news. That's not what you want. Yeah. Other resources of managing a crisis would be a couple of the things that would be important is to make sure that you have relationships built with members of the media that may cover your industry. So let's say you're in tech and you have news that goes out regularly in tech. One of the resources that are really good to have are a couple of reporters that know your industry. So if you have a crisis, you can go to those reporters and say, I have a relationship with you. You know what the truth is. You know how we operate. You'll tell the truth. and they'll operate in truth. And it's really important to have. And then also we develop situational templates, which mean that we actually build a template to complete, to make sure that people understand what to do in a crisis. Those are used largely to make sure people are all on the same page about what happens inside a crisis. So if the hotel is on fire and you're an employee of the hotel, what are your first couple of reactions? Is it to yell and scream at the front desk? Is it to run out yourself and not worry about your guests? Both of those are wrong. You want to make sure that you are in place to protect your asset and protect the guests in your hotel. All of those things happen inside a crisis comms plan. Are there any questions about this particular slide? This is a really important slide.
Andy, I guess I have a comment question. And I would assume that if this is done well, companies have crisis all the time, but if this is done well, they could come back even stronger and they could be looked at more favorably even after this.
100% true, Nadine.
Correct?
100% true. And this is a company that did it. Private River Networks did it. They came out stronger and they came out healthier as a result of this, even though they were lambasted in 2016, end of 2016. If handled correctly, your company can come out of a crisis stronger and healthier as a result. Several of you might remember years ago, the Chipotle crisis, and we shut every store down for an entire day nationwide. And I ran a national online crisis training for the entire company of Chipotle at one time. It took 4 hours. We reopened the next day. They survived the crisis. They're 2 times the size of their competitor now. There's no more question about fresh ingredients at Chipotle anymore. And when you work on it and you do it correctly, good results can take place. And that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Organize around the experts. One voice speaks on behalf of the entire organization. Follow the crisis plan and protocol already put in place. Make sure you don't deviate from that. You want to constantly be adjusting and adapt to the news cycle, business flow, public reaction, social media, phone calls, visits, website traffic, and law enforcement. So what's important about that is during the crisis of the server issue in the presidential race, the Clinton campaign would call me, including the secretary, and say, I don't want you to comment on anything regarding the servers at all. And I'd say to her respectfully and to her staff, I don't work for the campaign. I work for the server company. And the only way they're going to survive is to defend themselves. And they've done nothing wrong. So oftentimes there would be nobody on the call from the campaign. There'd be me, the FBI, usually the Department of Justice, and a couple of other people that would talk about exactly what is going on with regard to the server. So it's really important that you constantly are adapting to the news cycle, to what's happening in public, and all those related items, including social media, phone calls. Always respond to the media, even if there's no news to give. Media calls and says, we want to comment on X. You always call them back respectfully and say, never say no comment, by the way. Not ever, because that's basically an admission of guilt. But you want to say, we have no new news for you at this time. We'll be in touch when we do. And that leaves them with nothing to report. And rely on PR experts to utilize relationships to effectively manage the crisis ongoing. So when you hire a firm, you want to make sure that they have the contacts in media to make sure that they're controlling the narrative. They're not controlling what people write. I want to make that clear. But you are controlling the narrative. You're controlling what and how often they repeat it. And you're debunking anything that's not true, and you're validating everything that is. Here's some things to think about in a crisis. Got to play offense to manage inaccurate information. I've said that a few times. Can't be stressed enough. If you are not on the offense on inaccurate information, you lose. If you don't, it sifts out on its own. And you know that if you don't retort a falsehood, it becomes the truth. Because it's the same as not responding to the media. If the media asks you questions and you don't respond, they'll assume you're running from something. And as unfair as that is, That's the reality of the news business. Keep your emotions in check. Last week, legendary Indiana University basketball coach Bobby Knight died. And one of the things that I always remember about Bobby Knight is one time in a news interview, he picked up a folding chair and threw it across the room in a press conference. And Bobby Knight was known for his temper. It's interesting because while one of the greatest college basketball coaches ever, he was better known for his temper, and it led the news upon his passing about his temper more so than his record as a basketball coach in Indiana. So always keep your emotions in check. If people see you going crazy, they see you crying, they see you getting angry, they see you laughing or smirking, they pick up on all that. Remember who is being represented. Remember who is being represented. In crises, it's not about you as the CEO. It's not about you as the board. It's about your brand, as we said several slides ago. It's about how people view your brand and your reputation. The media is not out to get anyone. I know it's an unpopular thing to say, especially these days, but it's true. The media is not out to get anybody. They have a job to do, and they're going to do the best job they can to do it. As long as you understand that, or you have people in charge of your communications during a crisis understand that, it will go a lot smoother. If you see the media as a nemesis, or you see them as the enemy, or you see them as someone or something to avert, you lose. If you ignore the media, they will go away. That's the old adage, right? They'll just go away. Just ignore them. It's kind of like I do when my neighbor comes over and sells Girl Scout cookies. I ignore them to a certain point, and they just keep ringing the doorbell until I come to the door now. But the media will not go away. They will never go away, especially in a crisis. If there's a shooting in Denver, and we decide, you know what, if we just ignore the media on this, they'll go away. The story gets bigger, and it gets broader, and it goes further. And be back to your question about reputation. It can ruin an officer's reputation when he or she did nothing wrong. Conversely, if you address the media, if you address their questions, if you're willing to stand there and listen and obviously play offense on managing inaccurate information, as bullet point says number 1, and validate that truth that is, then you win the day. No comment is unacceptable. So you hear people all the time say, in a press conference, they say no comment, next question. No comment is exactly the same as I'm guilty. That's the news business. That's what happens in a crisis. So if they say, was anybody hurt in the fire in your hotel, for example? No comment. Next question. How can you address that as no comment? The natural inclination for people to think is, of course, there were people that were hurt and they're not willing to say it. Gauging the length of time it will take for it to go away is not determinable early on. You're not going to know when this is going to end. Let me bring up this Southwest Airlines debacle that happened over Christmas. And this is something we talked about when we were preparing for this presentation. We represent Southwest Airlines. Their debacle over Christmas was, and I call it debacle, a lot of people are angrier than that, would probably use other words than I will use. They parked 90% of their aircraft in Phoenix and Denver for 3 days. Didn't move them. And that was right over the Christmas holiday. Does anybody know why they did that? I'm curious to see how effective my plan was. What happened over Christmas?
Didn't they just not have enough people, or that's what I understood. Like there weren't enough staff.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly what happened. So they didn't park the planes in Denver and Phoenix because of any other reason other than they didn't have the staff to fly them. The FAA requires that you have a minimum of 6 crew on every aircraft for Southwest. And they booked more flights than they had staff. Now, your next question to me will be, why would they do something like that? It's the same old question about when you get to the airport and they ask for volunteers to step aside and take the next flight. Why do they overbook the airplane? This is the way the airline business works. They count on somewhere between 3 and 10% of an aircraft load to not show for the flight. 3 to 10%. Southwest way overemphasized that on Christmas, over Christmas holiday last year in Denver. Denver was the worst place for them in the country. They got more bad press than they've ever received for anything else. They've never had a plane go down, by the way, which would be worse than anything, obviously. But in terms of the stagnation of the aircraft while Christmas was happening, while people were trying to get out of town, people were yelling, why is my aircraft sitting at the gate and I can't leave? I can't go see my grandmother. I can't go get to my family. I can't go home. And my aircraft is sitting here. Imagine how frustrating that is. Maybe some of you were involved in it. My number one issue with that, when we were hired, I went directly to the CEO and I said, you have to apologize today. You have to get on national television and apologize. He refused for 2 days. On day 3, he went on national television and apologized. And by then we had unclogged and we were back in the air. But the problem with not admitting guilt, not being on the offense to manage inaccurate information, and B, I'm so grateful you said that because I was worried that other people would have other information that was inaccurate. But the information we said right away was, we do not have the personnel to staff this aircraft. Well, why did you sell me a ticket that says I'm leaving at 5:30 and it's 5:30, my aircraft's here and I can't leave? I don't have the staff to staff the aircraft. Okay, so that was the consistent response for 2 days. In addressing with the CEO directly, I asked him no less than a dozen times to please apologize publicly. It goes a long way when you admit guilt. It goes a long way when you say, you know what, we did mess up. And in the case of Southwest Airlines over Christmas, they messed up. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And the only way, B, to your point again earlier, the buck stops with the CEO. I think it was President Truman said the buck stops here, right? The buck stops at the CEO. And so if the CEO is not willing to go out and say, we screwed up, you're going to suffer irreparable harm to your brand. So now when you book a flight somewhere, and if you were a part of that Christmas debacle, you will give second thoughts to bringing Southwest Airlines into your itinerary versus a competitor, versus a legacy carrier like United or Delta. Same thing happened with Frontier Airlines. So years ago, if you remember, Frontier Airlines was an airline that people respected. We were a part of the animal campaign for Frontier. So those great big animals that are on the tail of that Frontier aircraft, we helped build. And then we wrote commercials. And if you remember those satirical commercials where the otter would talk to the whale while they were parked at gates, and they'd have the satirical back and forth, people loved that. People would fly Frontier. They'd pay on average $25 more a ticket to fly Frontier out of Denver than fly any other airline because we called it Denver's hometown airline. People were engrossed with the idea and the brand of Frontier. And we were very proud of that. And then the airline was sold. And now they charge you $3.99 for water. Talk about a crisis, right? So it's only, people think it's only about TV and print. It's not. Digital is also very critical. Even nominal digital is also very critical to the news cycle. Even the slightest hint on social media about a brand and about a crisis will do more damage than a TV story or a print story will do times 10. The amount of people that have stopped watching national news has dropped by 70%. So people do not watch national news on television anymore. They get it on their phones. They get it on their tablets. They hear from other people. They get on their computers. They're not sitting in front of the television watching Lester Holt anymore. The Tom Brokaw generation is gone. So now it's about digital. Now it's really critical that even the most minute nominal part of digital needs to be a part of your campaign to right the wrong. Don't ever give up. I sound like Bobby Knight, right? Don't ever give up. Consider an opportunity to rebrand. There are opportunities to rebrand. And if your brand is damaged somehow by a crisis that was unavoidable and it took a lot to get over, rebranding is always an opportunity. And it doesn't mean changing your name, and it doesn't mean necessarily even changing your look, but rebranding means we're coming out with a brand new opportunity for you to buy from us. And here's why we think it's important. It's really important to consider that. Keep a positive attitude. You can close the door and cry to your spouse, cry to your partner, cry to your roommate, cry to your best friend, cry to your mom. But when you're out front and you're representing a company or an entity in crisis, always keep a positive attitude. Always, always. Media is always a consideration. Google rankings, always a consideration. Company culture. I mean, I talk about this a lot, I know, and I appreciate the fact that I'm repeating myself about this, but involving your employees and the company in the crisis is as important as what you say to the public, because you want those employees to survive this as much as you do. And what happens in cultures where companies don't pay attention to it is it deteriorates faster, and people leave, and people don't want to join because they leave because of the crisis. They don't want to join because of the Google rankings. And at the end of the day, Glassdoor ends up being your worst enemy, right? Because people say they never paid attention to employees. They never paid attention to us, and you can't get new employees. So employee morale is critical. And also during a crisis, make sure you're staying visible with marketing efforts, email campaigns, newsletters, events, awards, and even some earned media. You really want to make sure that you're trying to do business as usual as much as possible during a crisis. If you're planning on surviving and you want to keep going, you want to make sure that your funnel stays full and that you're out there as much as possible doing business as usual. That's really critical. But don't ever, ever give up, because this too shall pass. And at the end of the day, when it does, and you see that sunlight again, you take a breath in and you feel like you've survived something you never want to go through again. But with the right people and with the right tools and with the right attitude, you'll survive just fine.
This is awesome, Andy. Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. And I want to pick on a couple people because I know that you guys have gone through some things in your careers. Regina and Jack, I'm going to pick on you so you guys can fight over who's going to go first. But Jack, are you in a place where you can talk? Or are you driving?
I'm driving, but I can talk. Yeah.
Okay, don't crash, Jack. Jack is a CFO of Plexus Worldwide. It's a huge company. But I know, before that, you've been at Starwood, you've been at Isogenics. Have you ever faced something like this where you thought, how are we going to get past this debacle?
I haven't, but we went through some training, maybe a half-day training a couple years ago, and I just remember coming out of it, realizing how ignorant I was about the thought of being put on the spot and not being prepared. And I'm not sure I feel much better, before this call about it. But it brought back all those memories about just, walking out to my car and somebody sticks a microphone in my face and asks me something I don't know, and I say something stupid. So I think that's the thing where, this kind of education, is probably needs to be done more frequently in a lot of corporates, and it needs to be practiced. Because we never followed up on it after that training, and I felt like, man, I need to go through like some role play, and really work it through and be put on the spot, because it's just not something you can just kind of do once and like feel good about it.
You're exactly right, Jack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when working for a publicly held company, the amount of preparation that our executives would go through for any kind of board presentation or earnings calls was really intense. And we never experienced anything at that company that was, to the level of what you're talking about, Andy. That was really, really interesting to hear, the plan and the strategy and how you manage through those, the crisis. But I do think that the training is so important because, crisis, they happen, no one expects them to happen. And just watching that level of preparation that our executives would go through for just an earnings call, we had nothing in place for something, if something catastrophic had happened. But I do know the one thing that I wanted to comment on is the communication to employees and stakeholders. I voted that was the number one priority out of the choices that I had, because I think that, to your point, Andy, that's how you get your credibility with your employees, is making sure that you're as transparent as you can be with them, and they understand what's going on and they're not hearing it from the news or on social media.
That's exactly right. I'm really happy to hear you say that. It's so critical, and it not only empowers the employees because they feel like they have the current information, but it also helps. They may have groupthink. They may have an idea that you haven't thought of yet, and they may say, "What about this?" or "What about this client? It may hit this client a certain way, so let's reach out to him or her to make sure that they understand what's going on." Like, employees are invaluable in these situations.
Yep, that's right. I think they can help you or harm you, depending on how you.
That's right. That's right. I've got an example of a. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to comment, not even in what would be a typical crisis situation, in the sense that Andy was very helpful to us back in the day when I was the CEO of a company that was merging with a national firm. And it was critical that the communication, both internally and externally, be done well and timely. Obviously, we want to retain our employees through this transaction. And it was really critical for us to make sure that we had our talking points in order, so that our employees felt they were part of the process. They felt good about the process. They could communicate to clients well. They could communicate when people ask them questions. And so I don't necessarily see something having to rise to the occasion of a crisis, but it could feel like a crisis to an employee when there is a significant transaction happening to a company, because they're wondering, is there something wrong? Why are we doing this? And we need to really assure them there wasn't anything wrong, and we had to give the rationale of why leadership had chosen this path.
You bet. That's right, Nadine. And what's interesting about that too is that a brief explanation to employees is just as important as letting them know what's happening. So you might tell them, like in your case, Nadine, when we merged, like, why exactly, and what does this mean for my job? Those are common questions that we could address right away without even talking to employees first, because we knew they were going to come up. So one thing that's really good about talking to employees during a crisis is actually, them well, you've hired them, you work with them, understanding what they might ask, and preparing, as Jack said earlier, even having the opportunity to role play ahead of time, how you're going to answer the questions that they're going to ask that are inevitably going to come up, because everybody wants to know they have the job is safe. They're still going to have a job after the merger, and they're still going to have an opportunity to thrive. Those kinds of things are always going to be questions that they'll ask. And if you bring in an expert and you talk through it, or even if you do it as an executive team, you can probably answer, half or more of those employee questions in role playing, so that you can do it when it's time to do it real time. You've got the answer and they feel better.
Yeah, and we prep for that, as you know, Andy, really hard, because we had hoped that we had asked, we had a list of all the questions that we anticipated would come when we made the announcement, as you know, and we had answers for them. And I don't think there was a question that was asked that we weren't able to give our employees an answer to at that time. And there was stuff that came up later on, and we were transparent. So, you know what, we don't know the answer to that at this time, and we'll get back to you. Yep. Or that hasn't been worked out entirely, but it was like, what is going to be key to these individuals? What do they really want to know? And that was it. Is this going to affect our job? Are we going to have a job? I mean, those are the things that people were panicked about. You knew they would get panicked about.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's an interesting point that you say that, because I've seen a lot of, obviously, when I was back in recruiting, a lot of my job was waiting for the chaos to happen and waiting for the fallout, because I knew employees would leave, right? But it seems like there's a strategy in place where you can minimize the the effect of all of your good employees leaving when something like this happens, right? There was a company I worked with that kept its employees because they kept promising they were going to IPO, and then different factors come into play. But there was a big talk in the executive team of how do we keep these people hanging on, because due to whatever factors. Like, is that part of this, internal crisis communication, Andy?
Sure.
Strategy?
I mean, it absolutely is, and the information provided, you can never be over prepared yourself. And one of the ways to best prepare is to make sure that you are giving correct information, but not too much information so that there is, opportunity for things to get twisted, or for people to say, well, I heard this, I didn't hear this. You basically want to stick to the script all the time. Make sure that you give them enough information so that it's helpful to them, but not so much so that they feel compelled to talk about it and to start to twist things around, because that's not helpful. And part of being on the offense with misinformation is also having to do with employees at times, because it can also have a negative effect where, the employees have enough information to be dangerous. And so the telephone game starts, right? That we all played as kids, where you go around the circle and all of a sudden you get back around to the other end of the circle and it's not at all what you said. And so you want to make sure and stay consistent, stay very clear. And also, transparency is really important. They know when employees are smart, smart people, they're going to know all the time when you're not telling them everything. And so what you want to do is be very succinct in what you're saying and why you're saying it. So in the fire, for example, in the hotel in LA, we, right away told every employee, obviously the ones that were in the hotel, to make sure and get all the guests out and clear out per their emergency protocol. But we also called all the employees that work for the hotel that were not on that night, and we told them what was happening. And that was really important to do because they felt like they were included in the process and didn't see it on the news first. They heard from their boss first and then saw it on the news. So it's really important to make sure that information is really succinct.
Pumping through your veins right now.
That's a great point, Andy. Thank you. Well, it is 5:30, and this was the portion of the evening where I wanted to have everyone just kind of talk about what is the one thing that you got out of this. Andy, you gave some great information, great insights. This will all be available on the website for if you guys want to, follow up later. I'll make sure to include everybody who was on this chat so you guys can continue the conversation. But real quick, if we can go around the horn and tell us, what did you get out of it? I think for me, I'm really surprised that just ignoring it and helping it goes away is not a strategy that works, because that is what I tend to do when I feel like I'm in crisis. I'm like, I'm sure it'll be fine. I'll just call Jack. He'll fix it. Jack Spitzer. But I think addressing it head on is something that I didn't really, didn't stop to think about, but it's true. It can prevent a lot of problems.
I guess it made me think a lot about just the steps and the strategy put into place. It's quite complex. I mean, I know that, it's common sense to say, oh, you have a PR team and you do this and you make the announcements but when we were walking through the different steps, it's a strategy with several different legs and arms to it that, that really address all different facets, especially with social media and, the different tools that people have today.
I was surprised to hear that after the crisis, some of these companies came out stronger, like Chipotle. Yeah,
I knew the Chipotle story. I'm a big Qdoba fan. So when Chipotle started going downhill, I was like, meh. But yeah, I know that they're a very strong brand now. Were you involved, Andy, bringing queso to Chipotle?
That's a question I get a lot. I was not. I'm not a fan of their queso, but I did not make that decision. I did not. But yeah, it's funny you say that about Qdoba, because I know when this all happened and we shut every Chipotle store. I don't know if you guys. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, Steve L is the founder of Chipotle. Was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, you want to close everyone? They have like 860 stores or something. And he's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I said, we're going to do it one full day. Everybody shows up and the stores are closed. And it was the best. I mean, I have a letter from him, from the founder, who said that was the best decision, because what it did was inform everybody, give everybody the right direction. We reframed the conversation, Qdoba was licking their chops, right? Because they were thinking this is going to be market share for us.
Yeah, right.
And or licking their queso, as it were, right?
But, hey, what happened with Chipotle? I don't think I know. I've never really liked it.
I'm really glad to hear that, B. I'm glad you never.
Not real Mexican food.
What?
Chipotle was accused of making people sick because they were using lettuce that was outdated and using other materials that perhaps were not fresh as they were advertising as such. So it made people were leaving Chipotle and getting sick. And it was happened to be a lettuce distributor to Chipotle in a certain part of the country that screwed up. And it really made people sick. And it was not okay. There was nothing about it that was funny actually at all. And so immediately, first thing we did, like day 2 of being hired, is we shut every store down and did this full day training.
How widespread? I mean, it was one lettuce distributor? Like, did a lot of people? Was it like 1 or 2 people that got sick?
No.
Like, was it a ton?
No, it wasn't. No.
Oh wow.
It wasn't. It was a significant number. I mean, enough so that it turned into a massive national issue.
Wow.
And made national news. Yeah.
Never hear about a cupcake making someone sick. It's always the worst.
Those damn vegetables.
Yeah.
Blame the vegetable. That's right.
Jenna, I would love to know what your thoughts are. So Jenna is one of our chief advisors in Sweet Sea, and she's our go-to for anything kind of finance leasing thing. But I know you have a ton of clients that are high profile. Have you ever seen anything